Greetings, my brothers and sisters. Sending gratitude to all of you who are joining in today to accompany us down the rabbit hole of self-exploration through plant medicines. My name is Ryan Sprague, and I'm here to tell you that your frequency is now set and tuned to explore psychedelic medicines and the impact they've made among the countless psychonauts exploring the last true frontier. Buy a ticket and take the ride with me as we get true first-hand accounts of the experiences, benefits, risks, and transformations taking place within the ever-expanding world of psychedelic medicines on This One Time on Psychedelics. As you guys have all heard me say enough times by now, we really don't need psychedelics to invoke a psychedelic experience, as all these medicines do is open us up to the true reality that is always all around us, but is not always perceptible to us due to the human condition. Today's guest on the show is a woman who has made her life the definition of the aforementioned statements and what she has brought to the world. Her story is one steeped in following her heart into the unknown with the faith that it would all make sense in the long run. And over the years, she has not only created a curriculum of tuning fork technology that has shifted the world at large, but has also authored 2 books, both Tuning the Human Biofield and Electric Body, Electric Health, which have changed the lives of thousands of people worldwide, including myself, and allowed them to become their own healers through the modality of tuning fork healing she teaches. I had the chance to meet her at a music festival we both attended in Texas this past April, and after that event, I knew I had to have her on the show to share her magic with each of you. This episode is a true look into the hero's journey that we all have the capability and capacity to enact in our lives when we get ourselves out of the way long enough to have spirit speak through us. So please help me in welcoming my dear friend, Eileen McKusick, to the show. Eileen McKusick, God, am I so excited to have you here with me today. You know, as I said in the intro, it was probably about 5 years ago that, maybe 4, you could correct me if I'm wrong, because it was when you went on Paul Chek's podcast, I think for the first time, and I became aware of Tuning the Human Biofield. And I remember it was right when the pandemic silliness was going on, so I had a lot of time in my hands. So I remember downloading that book on Audible and walking around this park near my house, Webb Park, listening to it. No one was there because everyone was, social distancing and doing their thing. So I had the whole park to myself. And it was just amazing how many things rang true to me in that book, even with not having any knowledge around tuning fork modalities or anything. And then a couple of years later, I got to go to Paul's house for a shamanic sound healing workshop. And I got to play around with a lot of, tuning forks that come from your company. And when I went to Confluence, it was the first time I got to be around you. We didn't actually get to connect too much there because, there was so much fun stuff going on. But, it was the most badass thing ever. That morning that you tuned the biofield in the United States to the energetic frequency of July 4th, 1776. I was like, this woman is so badass. So before we dive into all this stuff and your epic journey, I want to start with kind of some context here, right? How does someone like you, who is so connected to worlds unseen, right, as one can say, how did this whole journey start for you, right? I know you've experimented in the past with psychedelics and things like that. You're no stranger to that. But like we were talking about before we hit record, it's almost like you never needed psychedelics to enter a psychedelic reality. So how did this all start for you? I'm so curious.
Well, I would say that my very first experimentation with marijuana, I've had a series of psychedelic assisted, propulsions along the way. So
Yeah.
I'm very much a scientist and a researcher. I'm a curious human. I like to do experiments. One of my favorite things to say is, well, what happens if we try this? And so I decided that I wanted to see what would happen when I smoked as much pot as I possibly could. When I was 17, I rolled a bunch of joints and I went off into the woods and I just smoked as much as I possibly could. And I had this experience of inner illumination where I just felt like light inside. And I was like, what? Am I Jesus Christ? That was the only framework that I could attach this experience of inner illumination to. I remember walking home and I was just like, I thought I was glowing, that I was so illuminated. So that was really an interesting experience. And then I went on to do mushrooms when I was 18. And, had that kind of visceral awakening to the fluidity of nature. And then I did acid for the first time, and that was really life-changing. Like, that really changed my whole life. I have the good fortune to do acid in a really cool place. I
Mm.
was at a cottage on Clear Lake in Northern California that was built with the remnants of Hearst Castle. And it had all these
Wow.
really interesting architectural details in this little cabin. And through that experience, a number of things happened that really changed my perception of reality. One was this complete grokking that all was one. Like,
Mm.
I really saw and felt and had this very visceral sense of the inherent unity of life.
Mm.
I also had this experience of myself as an incredibly expanded human. Like, I felt like I was on the top of a really high mountain. Like, I got really high and really expanded, and I was like healing people with like just my hand, like a wave of my hand. And I don't know, it was an incredible place. And I'm like, wow, I'm enlightened. Like, I'm going to be like this for the rest of my life. And then, boy, the next day, like, I contracted to like the size of a pinhead. And I realized that even though my soul had this capacity for this incredible expansion and like bright, strong, clear vibration, I was in reality a very fucked up 18-year-old American girl,
Mm.
and was very damaged. And I was bulimic from 17 to 20. And when I was 18, I tried to stop and I couldn't. And that was the first time I would experience myself as feeling split inside, right? There's this conscious mind that wants to stop with the self-destructive behavior, but then this whole subconscious pattern of behavior that was stronger.
Mm.
And that was kind of horrifying to me, right? I think anybody who's confronted with themselves as an addict is, it's like, how did I end up such a mess? And how do I
Mhm.
sort myself out? Right.
Mm.
So I started reading self help books. And when I was 18, I've always been kind of a geeky kid. I skipped a couple grades and can read very quickly and assimilate and synthesize information very quickly. And so I used to read tons of fiction, and I turned that lens onto nonfiction. And I started reading things like Tony Robbins and Wayne
Mm.
Dyer, Marianne Williamson, all those things like back in the 80s, And and would go on to continue to read. And anybody who's a researcher, a lot of people who watch podcasts get, that there's a thread, that there's a trail of crumbs that you follow. And
Mhm.
I think about 1996, I stumbled upon the topic of vibrational medicine and the
Mm.
use of color and sound and music in healing. And that was really interesting to me. I went out and I got all the books I could, which in 96 wasn't a lot. And I just made it through my little stack of books, and I got a Gaia catalog in the mail that had a set of tuning forks for healing in it.
Mm.
And on impulse, I ordered them. And at the time, I was doing massage therapy part time. I also owned a restaurant, but I was transitioning out of the restaurant business into more of a health and wellness kind of focus.
Mm.
And so I started experimenting on my massage clients with my tuning forks, and that was 28 years ago. And I'm still experimenting with tuning forks. I've just never gotten tired of them. And I'm one of those people that, like, I try a lot of things. I'll do something for a day, 2 days. I put things down, but the tuning forks they've taken me on a journey of self-discovery, human potential discovery, musical discovery. I mean, they've taught me so much. And it's a
Mm.
funny thing, there's something about even the word tuning fork, like tuning fork for healing. It just sounds so fruity, right? And I I didn't want to do it as a career. I did it as a hobby for 10 years. And you can imagine the way people reacted to me in Connecticut in the 90s when I told them I was doing sound healing and tuning forks. They're like, not the
Oh,
kind of reaction you want people to have when you tell them what you do. so
yeah.
so I was like, I'm never going to do that as a vocation. It's too embarrassing. Uh, so I was in the restaurant business, then I was in the specialty food business. I actually brought the very first kettle corn into stores back in 2004. And
Wow. I have
yeah,
you to thank for that in my
I mean,
teenage
thanks.
years. Game recognized game.
Yeah, I started making organic maple kettle corn in 2004. And then in 2006, I had a very interesting thing happen in my hobby, right? Because I was still seeing maybe 2 people a week.
Mm.
People just find me sort of by word of mouth, and I was just kind of continuing my curiosity. But I had only been working right over the body, and had developed a little practice of finding loud spots. I'd wave the fork over the body until I hit a loud spot, and then use the tuning fork like a magnet. It's so bizarre. I was like, I don't even know how this is working, but I could like stick the magnet, the tuning fork in the loud spot and like drag it to the center of the body, the midline of the body. I call it click, drag, and drop. So this little practice of like finding loud spots, dragging them to the middle. And people would say, oh, I feel so centered afterward, right? So then one day in 2006, I accidentally discovered a loud spot about 2.5 feet away from someone. And when I adjusted that, this person had a very dramatic recovery to a very difficult situation. And that led me to start exploring the atmosphere around the body. And that led to a 4-year journey of actually mapping the biofield. Just sort of like the signature cornerstone of my work is what I call the biofield anatomy map. And it's the recognition that our body is actually inside our mind and not the other way around. And that our mind is our body's electrical system. It's shaped like a torus, and it is light. And that inner illumination that I could only attribute to something spiritual like Christianity, that I had when I was 17, I came to understand like, oh, that's my electrical system. It's biological. And so this discovery of plasma, the fourth state of matter, the body's electrical system really reconciled sort of science and spirituality in realizing that the biofield, the body's electrical system, is what we call mind, is what we call our conscious mind, our subconscious mind. It's where our memories are stored. But it's also the same thing, I would call it our soul as well, because when you die, your light goes out. And we have all these, experiences of people going out of their body. I've actually, when my 220-pound English Mastiff was put down, my husband and I actually saw light rise up out of his body. And they've done studies where they've actually measured the weight of people before and after they pass, and they become lighter. And then my experience of working with the biofield is that it does actually have mass. It's light, it's faint, but it does have mass. And the tuning forks act kind of like an invisible ink decoder, echolocation. I bounce sound off the body, and the pingback comes back with all kinds of information. So it's just revealed so much to me.
Wow. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, when I was reading Tuning the Human Biofield, I remember your whole story of like, leaving the restaurant business and the food business. And, it's really funny too, because for me, I see a lot of like similarities, obviously not in exactly what we do, but like, plant medicine was our catalyst to waking up, right? Then we started messing around with different things. And for me, it was very similar with cannabis because I was in the industry for years. I was all about growing cannabis and things like that. And I still love that stuff. But when I had my awakening around cannabis and realized that I wasn't using it properly and that there was a better way that I could actually utilize it for spiritual growth, and I started having this awakening and started having these experiences, it was like, who do I share this with, right? Because at that point, I didn't know people like you, everyone that I was hanging with at Confluence, I didn't know any of them yet. So the only people I was really friends with were people from childhood or all my cannabis industry people. And in the industry, most people that are in the industry are just numbing out like crazy, smoking chemically grown cannabis, right? All the things. So they don't want to hear about this kind of stuff because it's a huge trigger for them, right? They're just like, shut up, I don't want to hear that, right? So it was like very interesting because same for me, when I got into coaching, it was like I knew all this stuff with cannabis just happened. But at the same time, I was like, well, maybe I'll be a mindset coach. Maybe I'll be a transformation coach. And meanwhile, I'm bringing my cannabis, my hobby around with me. And people like Paula Check, Aubrey Marcus later on, and people like that are like, dude, this is so different. And like the whole time the signs were there. But like, I feel like I had to get to a point where I was ready to be like, okay, I'm willing to put myself out there in that way. And I love you showcasing that part of your journey, that it didn't just come to you right away, that you started messing with tuning forks and you're like, boom, this is going to be my whole career. Because I think for a lot of us that are into anything esoteric or qualitative, a lot of people listen to this show probably, there is that kind of fear coming up, right? Of like, what are people going to think of me? What am I going to think of myself? And I think that what your story articulated so perfectly is that there was a trajectory that was necessary to happen, right? Like you didn't have to go jump headfirst into it. There was a time where it did just get to be your hobby. And because you didn't have any pressure on it to make all your money or to, build a whole business around it or anything, it allowed you to have more fun within it, I imagine, as well. And through that fun and following that fun, you were able to discover a system that then once you discovered the system and you were already practicing massaging and things like that, then it actually lit you up in a way where you were like, now I'm ready. And I feel like, for a lot of us, myself included, when I look back in my journey, there were many points in which I tried to rush myself into different aspects of my life, whether it's music, whether it's with cannabis, things like that. And it's so refreshing to hear other people's stories of that because, life really does have a way. God has a way, creator has a way, whatever you want to call it, omniscient power. And so long as we're listening to the signals within and, tuning ourselves to be able to listen to them, right? But, also being able to follow that fun, we'll always end up where we're meant to end up with the people that are meant to be around us and doing the things we're meant to be doing, So it's just really cool to hear your journey. I'm sure that'll be inspiring for listeners as well.
Yeah. Speaking of having fun, I've had the very good fortune of being at Confluence twice in the last year and Music in Sky. And we have such a wonderful crew of people that are open-minded, that are intelligent, that are well-read, that are healthy, freedom-oriented. Originally I conceived Confluence and people want to know the why. I'm like, I just want to have fun. I just want to get together with the people I love and have fun. That's what I want to do. And to me, that is really the end game of healing, because I think that when we're in pain, when we're in debt, when we're in lack, when we're in struggle, when we're in drama, when we're in stories, when we're in the noise of our signal instead of the clarity of our signal, it's very hard to have fun. It's very hard to have a light-hearted approach. I really come to see that we're all like Stradivariuses that have been handled very badly, and we all have this incredible potential within us, but we've been battered and bashed and never really tuned up. And so when you start to get in tune and the stories, the struggles, all that stuff starts to drop away, and you're basically making more space for God in your being, truly. And that there is a real quality of levity there, that the end game of healing is actually to have fun. Like, why anybody thinks that they want to have money, they want to have freedom, they want to have a nice car, it's because you want to have fun, because we're all still kids and kids like to play. You give any animal a ball, even a bee, and they'll play with it, right? Life is playful. And so that's kind of where I've gotten to. Once you get out of the woods of all the ancestral noise that you inherited and all the cultural noise and all of your personal trauma, this can all be backed out of our signals, and we can be restored into a place of harmony and balance. And that is where our potential as humans is. Everybody knows that they have more potential, some in a lot of cases way more potential than you're able to realize. And maybe it's because you're caught, like I was, in some kind of addiction or what have you. But there are the tools and the technologies, not just with my work, there's lots of stuff out there now to help you to become free of those entanglements and really liberate yourself into the best version of yourself.
Oh my goodness. I am so glad you just said that. Like, there is nothing that resonates as more truth to me than the whole idea of fun, and you articulated it perfectly. Like, I feel like healing is the byproduct that naturally happens when you know how to have enough fun. And I feel like people have flip-flopped it a little bit. And I see this a lot in the spiritual communities and whatnot, not at Confluence, right? There was none of that there. And again, there's no judgment in what I'm about to say. Like, I've been there too, but that kind of like heavy, like, I'm in healing, I need to heal. Even with plant medicine, right? Why are you doing it? I need to heal, right? It's like, well, healing, when you focus on healing, what you're also telling yourself is that you're not healed. And so there's a story there, or there are going to be multitudes of stories about what you can do as an unhealed person, when in reality, kids are a great example of this, right? They're not running around. They don't have any context for generational trauma, ancestral lineage work, trauma that happened in this lifetime. They're just having fun. And then at a certain point, something will happen. And if they're below the age where they've been told to be a good boy or girl, or that, good kids are seen, not heard, or any of these silly, belief systems that adults put on them because they're adulterated, right? But like, it's like before they learn that, they just let their emotion out. They don't care if they're in a store, a restaurant, at home, wherever it is. And if a parent is conscious enough to understand what's going on and not try to stop them in that, eventually after about 10, 15 minutes, and I remember this as a kid, you'll be cried out. and then you'll be back to joy, right? There was no needing to go heal to get that done, right? Like there was just having fun until all of a sudden something else comes over. And the other key to this, I feel, is presence, right? Like when whatever comes up, just be present with it. And, I've heard that stat so many times. I'm not really sure if it's accurate. I mean, I'm sure you'd probably be able to tell me, or maybe it's even quicker doing tuning forks. But, if an emotion is unobstructed, it runs its course in, I think, 10 or 15 minutes maximum. Like if it's not attached to a generational trauma or something of that nature. I'm curious for you, and I'm just going to ask this because I'm genuinely curious myself. You mentioned that one story of that person, the first person you found something 2.5 feet out from. What have been some of the correlations you've noticed in doing this work for so long now and being able to allow people to heal, right? Like, and what I'm looking for here is like, do people have to come in with an intention that they have to heal and they're unhealed to get that healing done? And also, when you're doing that, is there kind of like a average of, how long it takes, or is it different based on each individual?
Well, it depends on how old you are, right? Because the biofield is a torus. And in my work, your memories are stored in standing waves in your magnetic field. So your field extends about 6 feet, neither side, front and back on average. And an 80-year-old has the same size field as like a 10-year-old. So it's sort of like a hard drive that fills up over time, and patterns tend to repeat. A lot of the patterns that get laid down in our first 3 years of life, the beginning of our wiring, our stories about ourselves, then life tends to move along those established pathways. So the older you are, the more embedded you are in your entire field in a particular habit or pattern of mind. Whereas, the younger you are, it's a lot easier. So the intensity and duration of a particular imbalance is going to dictate how much we need to work on you to help you to get sorted. So the work, we can do it in all different kinds of ways. I had an experience where I was at Anarchapulco and at a banquet, and I just happened to be sitting next to a guy who had all this muscle tension down his arm. And between courses, I pulled out my forks and I released it like completely until, and he's like, wow, all the swelling went down and he had full rotation. And then our meal came, you know what I mean? So it can be used like that in situations like that. You're in pain. I'm going to work on you, just a spot treatment to help you to release. Because fundamentally, what the tuning forks do is through echolocation or sonar, they find areas of subconscious tension in the body through the field, because the field is kind of like an exploded view of the body. Magnetic fields guide and inform electric currents. So if you have a lot of stagnation and energy stuck in your liver because your father was an alcoholic and his father was an alcoholic, and you're trying not to be an alcoholic and you're suppressing your rage, and you have generations of rage and alcoholism informing your liver, right? Then your liver is going to be kind of funky. And when I bounce sound off of it, we'll hear that. Oh, you're listening. Wow.
Yeah, something's
Right?
happening.
But then your liver will hear itself, and your liver's like, well, I'm not supposed to sound that way. And your body's organizing intelligence will use this reflection of sound to tune itself. Basically, we're self-tuning instruments. And just like you don't know that your hair is a mess and you have a poppy seed in your teeth until you look in a mirror and you have a reflection, right? When you see yourself, what do? You put yourself in order. When the body hears itself with the sound reflected off of it and it's out of order, it goes to put itself in order right away. And so what will happen is where that tension and buildup of energy is, will relax, settle down. And then we use the tuning fork like a magnet in the field to guide the magnetic energy, which then shifts the way the electric energy, and this is all hypothesis, is moving. So now there isn't charge and discomfort and liver issues and anger flare-ups because you've been balanced there.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah. So, you could come in for an hour-long session, lie down on a table. Well, for me, the tuning process is like dropping a needle on an album and like reading the vibrational record of your life. And I can tell you all the ages where you had difficult things happen. I can tell you personality of your mom, the personality of your dad, your mental tendencies, your emotional tendencies, right? So it's working on the mental body, physical body, emotional body, spiritual body, relational body, right? Environmental relationships. All of that is all part of your vibrational template. And it's either in tune and flowing, or it's like out of tune and stuck. And so I would say the biggest thing that I treat is actually stuckness.
Yeah. That makes so much sense. Right after I read your book, I was like, oh my God, I got to try this. Cause, it's funny when you mentioned in the beginning, like I'm someone who tries a lot of things. I'm the same way. That's, I think, why I resonated so much to your story, because I feel we're so similar in that way. Like a classic fuck around, find out, like very similar to you. When my dad got sick when I was 23, my dad had cancer. And, I had been messing around with mushrooms for a year or so at that point, pretty responsibly, like, very, like I had a lot of anxiety at that time still. And so I was very careful to not do too big of a dose. But once he got sick, I was like, well, everything I've heard about says don't do mushrooms if like you're going through something. But I just instinctively knew at that time, like this is going to support me. So me and a lot of my friends, my parents always took most of the kids in the town. So like they were like everyone's parents. So during that time, it was like me and probably 5 other friends that would just take massive doses of mushrooms every weekend. And during that time, I had a lot of stuff happen, like classic fuck around, find out. There was one where I ended up what I believe was in heaven, just pure heaven, like pure golden light. All my friends were there. We had no context for what this was. None of us were ever religious or even spiritual to that point. That was actually like a big catalyst for me to be like, well, I don't have any context for that. I can't explain that with human terms, like maybe there is something here. But again, like, that curious nature, I think, is what it means to be a human being. Of course, different, people have different amounts of it. But right after I read your book, I was like, I got to try this. Because at that time, I've been a huge fan of acupuncture. I was getting a lot of emotion code and body code readings. I was doing brain integration therapy. I don't know if you ever heard of that, BIT, but that one's really cool. And I just love this kind of stuff. I've been like so fascinated with these types of healing modalities because when I was a kid, my mom went through some health challenges. My dad too. My dad had like rheumatoid arthritis, all these like weird autoimmune things. My mom, very similar, degenerative disc disease. And they just totally fell into a guy in a white lab coat or a girl in a white lab coat said, this is all I could do. So that's it, basically. And, even when I was a young kid, I was like, I don't feel like that's right. But of course, when I was very young, I didn't have any context for how to like actually argue that point. So when I started finding modalities like these, I was like, okay, this is what I feel I'm missing. And so right after reading your book, I booked an appointment with someone that's trained under your system. And we did it through the phone, which a lot of people that are listening may not know you can do it that way, which is amazing. And I'll ask you in a second, like how that's possible. I imagine there's a quantum or unified field type aspect to it or whatever. But, it was amazing. I mean, she was telling me so many interesting details about certain ages in my life where things happened. And she would ring the tuning fork. That might not be the official term, but I'm going to use silly infant terms here. She would ring the tuning fork, or sound it rather. And all of a sudden she would say something like, yeah, what was happening when you were 6 years old to do with your mother and something to do with school? And all of a sudden it would just be like, boom, it would be right there. And so this went on for, I guess, an hour right around there. And it flew by in like minutes. And I remember leaving that appointment like, holy shit, that was wild. And I remember feeling really good the next couple of weeks. And then, of course, more stuff piles up. And it's just amazing, though, because, to know that you can do that even through a phone, not even Zoom, right? Like through a phone was amazing. And I definitely felt the effects of it. So I'm curious for you, like, because I imagine many listeners will be like, wait, why can you do it through a phone? How would you describe why modalities like this are able to be done through a phone and you don't actually need to be local with someone to be able to get the healing?
Well, a few things. One, we all know that music moves us,
Yeah.
right? And I don't need to like be at a live concert to be moved by sound coming through my phone.
Yeah.
So,
I love that.
um, but what's weird is that it also works even if you don't have an open line of communication. And the very first time I did one, so people asked me for years, they're like, oh, can you do this at a distance? And I was so arrogant about it. I was like, absolutely not. Like, what a dumb question. This is sound waves on the body, people. This is physics. No way I'm doing it at a distance. Like, um, and so, but then, but I am a scientist, right? And I do like to experiment. And so I had the very good fortune of making the acquaintance of a gentleman named Dr. Carl Merritt, who is an MD in California. And the way that I came across him was I was doing research for my master's thesis that I worked on from 2011 to 2012. And in the course of that, I came across a PDF online that was a history of energy medicine, a history and current state of energy medicine in the United States. And it was like this 30-page PDF with all these hyperlinks. I spent a whole day reading through it, following the links, and learned so much. And at the end, I'm like, who put this together? Like, who's the person who has this big overview like this? Turned out it was Dr. Merritt. So I reached out to him. I told him about what I was doing, about biofield tuning, about how I was writing a master's thesis on it. Well, he went through my master's thesis page by page with me. He helped me so much. And in the process, he asked me if I would be willing to try doing it on a distance for him. And I was like, well, I doubt it's going to work, but let's give it a try.
I guess.
So he lay down on his treatment table in his office in California, and I pretended that he was on my table in Vermont. Okay. No open line of communication, no phone, no Zoom, nothing. So in biofield tuning, what I would do if somebody came into the office, especially back then, was I would go through the whole field at that time. I would go through the whole field and I'd read everything I'd read the person's whole history, what was going on in their body. And so much to my amazement, the same pattern of information that would show up around a body showed up around my table. And I was like, whoa, this is really weird. And I'm like going through the field and I'm taking notes. Now, there's this approach in biofield tuning. When you're working in the field and you get stuck in the field, you take your weighted forks and you go to the body and you put sound into the body. And that can help to relax whatever it is you're working on and make it easier to go to the field. So I got to that point where I would like go to the body. I'm like, but there's no body there. I'm like, but there's no body there. So I went over with my weighted forks and just kind of held them in space over the table, feeling very strange about it. And then I went back to the field, and that same feeling that you encounter where, oh, now it's easier to move happened, right? So I went through his field and I took all these notes. And then when I finished, I got on the phone and I called him and I went through my notes. And I'm like, you had a head injury when you were 5, you have inflammation in your left shoulder, your spleen and pancreas was really off rhythm. You had a really stressful time between 30 and 32. Your mom has this personality, or whatever, like the whole thing. Like I read his life like a book. And he said, Eileen, that is all exactly correct. And I felt a state change while you were working on me. He said, I feel lighter now. And he tested his blood sugar before and after and had a noteworthy change in it, which was really interesting. And I was like, well, now I got to go eat crow. I've been so arrogant about the impossibility of this. So, when people are skeptical, like I totally get it. Like nobody's more skeptical than me, honestly. And I'm one of those people that I have to experience it to believe it, right? And I did. And I was like, okay, well, it works from Vermont to California. Will it work from Vermont to Australia? Now, I don't know if you know our friend Brendan Murphy, but I had met Brendan back in like 2010 when I was working on my master's thesis. I was researching ether, and I came across an article he wrote, and then he and I became pen pals because we had very similar lines of inquiry in our lives. And so Brennan was the second person to ever receive a biofield tuning session at distance, exact same scenario. So then I started doing distance sessions. And in the beginning, I was not on the phone. And what was very cool about the time that I did that was everything has a very specific frequency signature. Like a breakup sounds a particular way. A car accident sounds a particular way. Peeing at your desk in first grade because the teacher wouldn't let you go to the bathroom has a particular sound and like placement in the field. And I find that people are like, how do you even know that happened? I'm like, well, I know that sound and I know that placement. When you're 6 years old, it's in the shame. Like it's a whole thing. There's a whole very intricate language there. that's very pure and very detailed and very nuanced. And so I started to be able to tell because I didn't have someone on the table to be like, okay, what happened when you were 13? That feels very drastic. You know what I mean? They weren't there to ask. So I had to listen even deeper into this process of decoding this language of vibration. Be like, oh yeah, that is definitely a move. Yeah, I moved when I was
That's
14. That
definitely
was
pee and
very
pants.
bad, kind of thing. um, and then I would get on the phone with people and we'd go over notes and they'd tell me about their experiences and how they felt it. And then I started doing it over the phone and then over Zoom. And so that's the way that I do sessions these days is over Zoom. So, the music through your phone doesn't explain the how do you do it just by intention, right?
Hmm.
And it goes back to the ether and this idea that the underlying fabric, that everything is made out of is all the same thing. It's all spun light. And that we are spun light. And even though I appear as a focal point, I am technically infinite because I'm made of an infinite substance. So, just from this space, I can stick a fork right in this space right here and tune into anything or anyone I want because it's in the ether. It's in the Akashic record. It's like going to get a website or a file that's in the cloud, right? You're just there. You exist as a file in the cloud, and I can click on you and work on your file. We can edit it in real time together through the ether.
It's the coolest thing too, because and when I read that in your book, it totally rang as true to me because, for anyone of course on this show, I guarantee everyone listening has done this, but for anyone who's taken psychedelics, you realize that a lot of what you don't actually know. And when you go deep enough into them and you go deep enough into modalities like this, you realize, oh, I know nothing. And actually, that's the best part of life is that we know nothing because we're not really meant to know anything necessarily. We're meant to be like kids in the playground, right? Just getting curious and fucking around, finding out, as some might say. But, what's really cool about it is that that's what every spiritual text since the dawn of time talks about, right? We're infinite beings. Solar One talks about it. We may have different terminologies we put on it, but it's amazing that what your book really did for me is allow me to not just intellectually understand that science and spirituality were one thing, but to actually have the direct experience of it through the modality and everything like that. And it was a couple of years later when I found biogeometry. And that was where I actually took a course for that. I haven't taken your courses yet. I'm really excited to. But that was the first course where I actually got to experiment with what's referred to as non-local healing, very similar to what we're talking about, or same thing really. And I remember that there was a gentleman I got paired up with, and one of the assignments was we were meant to print out a picture of one another and use a certain pendulum they call the Jedwaj pendulum. It's kind of got a flat bottom, so you can put it on a picture. And all it does is emit BG3, which is what Ibrahim Karim refers to as the three bands of energy that are at the center and focal point of everything, aka God, creator, whatever you want to call it. And I remember that I put that on there. He had told me he had some left shoulder thing or something. So I was okay. So I set it on there and I left it there for 24 hours. Well, about 18 hours in, he sent me an email and he's like, hey, are you doing that today? Because I didn't tell him what day. That was the whole thing. We weren't going to tell each other what day we did it, but we were going to see if we could feel it just instinctively or intuitively. And I remember I got an email from him and he's like, hey, around 4 p.m. today, I felt a very interesting feeling in my left shoulder. And now I have way more mobility. Did you happen to do that today? And I was like, oh my God, it worked. I was like, yeah, dude, I did do it today. And I remember when he did mine, I was experiencing a lot of headaches and neck tension and stuff. And it was funny because right around this time was the time I realized that I had always had my hair in a tight ponytail, and I had tried everything. I mean, I had gone to chiropractors, acupuncturists, massage therapists. I've gone to doctors. I'd gotten x-rays. I tried everything for these fucking headaches, right? Every single day for a year and a half, I had them. And they were extremely frustrating. And I remember one day I just got this download. I'm like, wait a minute. Why do I always have my hair up? And it wasn't put my hair down. Maybe that will get rid of my headache. It wasn't about that at all. It was just this weird thing of why do I always have my hair up? I should let my hair down. And it was a figurative and literal thing. And that's what made it so funny is that experience allowed me not just to literally put my hair down, but figuratively, it took weight off me. It was it was an action that represented a lot more than just putting my hair down. But when I did that, all of a sudden the headaches went away. And so I hit him up on the day that I get that download, that idea. And I didn't actually put my hair down that day because I was I just got the download of it. But I was like, hey, I got this really weird awareness today. Like, were you doing it today? And he's like, yeah, I was doing it today. So it's fascinating to me because for me, I've always been very open-minded, almost like to a detriment, at certain times. But I've always been very open-minded, and I've always known that there's more here than we've been told. I'm like, wait, so we're born into this realm just to wear khakis and pay taxes and die and tell people when they ask us how life's going that life sucks, then you die. Like, haha, very funny. And you're from the Northeast, right? Like you get that kind of like, hilarity of living in this area, where it's a very blue collar area, things like that. But at the same time, it was just so hilarious to me. And, I think there's a lot of reasons why they say laughter is the best medicine, because I think the more you laugh, the closer you are to God, And so it's kind of like those interesting sayings that until you experience the experiential understanding of it, you may intellectually understand it, but when you experience it, it totally changes you forever, and it was just so fascinating that happened. And so after that, I was bought in even more. And, I'm curious for you. This is a question that comes from my friend Kim. I already asked you this actually when we did our networking call, but I do want her to hear it live on the show. So my buddy, Mark England, he's one of my main mentors in life and just a great buddy of mine. And we just got back from Virginia. We were down there hanging out at this farm, shooting fully automatic rifles and having a blast. And he went to Earth Tuned, I believe it is, and got these megalithic tuning forks. They're borderline weapons. Like they could double as a weapon in a zombie apocalypse for sure. I mean, they're huge. For anyone that obviously is not seeing this visually, like they're like probably, I don't know, over 12 inches. They're huge. Now, with your tuning forks, the ones I've played with at Paul Check's house, I know they're pretty average size, right? Like not crazy small, but they're not like gigundous as well. Does anything change when you have like gigantic tuning forks versus small ones? Are they more powerful? Are they less powerful? Do they work the same way? I'm curious. Give me the deets.
Yeah. Well, I had the opportunity to play with some of those big ones. I was in February, I spent 6 days with India Ari. I don't know if you know who she is.
Yeah, I do.
In myself and India and 3 other people, we were 5 of us that met every day. And we were just playing with sound together, which was a really delightful thing to do. But India has a couple of those really big ones, and we were doing some tunings, and there were definitely some places we encountered with tuning where I was like, get the big fork. But I was also working with someone who was 6'3" and like, I don't know, like a big guy, you know what I mean? And so our friend Chance Garten, he also uses those big forks, and Chance is a big guy. You know what I mean? So if you're a big guy with big hands, get the big forks. But if you're a little girl like me, you don't need them. Do you know what I mean? They're just impractical from a use perspective because they're heavy. But they definitely work, and I think I actually came up with a frequency because during COVID, this blanket of fear really settled on all of humanity. And the forks that I had been using, like, weren't quite getting through in the way that I wanted to. And so I created a lower frequency fork. It's 144 hertz. Let's get it out and show you. And this actually did the trick. Like it solved the problem that I was. And so this is the longest fork that I make is the 144. That compared to a higher frequency, like a 528. Right. So that's a 528.
Oh,
so
yeah.
The lower the frequency, the longer the fork. So that's the biggest fork I've got. And it does everything I need it to do. Like I don't need the big fork. But I love seeing big guys with big forks. So.
It is the funniest thing. I mean, it feels like I'm holding Thor's hammer.
Yeah.
And it does make me feel very powerful when I hold it. And they also have, I don't know what it's called. You'll probably know, but it's a circular thing that hangs from a rope. And they hit it, and it does, I think, the same thing. I'm not sure, but Mark got a double-sided one that's like the biggest one. Then he has one that's just like a regular, looks just like yours, but just gigundous, like it's like Thor's hammer. Yeah. And then he's got that one that kind of yeah, exactly. What are the oval ones all about? Like, I'm curious if you work with those, or if they're just the same but different shape type thing. Or
I'm not familiar with those. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, we were messing around with them when we were down at the farm. We had a couple of people there that do sound healing, so that they were much better than I at it. I was just hitting it to see what happened, but they were putting the circular one inside of a singing bowl while they were singing the bowl, and they were hitting it. And I'll tell you, there
Wow.
was a night that we were connecting with psychedelics there, and about 20 of us were just like hovered around that table. And I think that's one of the best things about, psychedelics with things like this that are a little more qualitative, a little harder for like the average person to wrap their head around. Like, wait, like, okay, so you're telling me about this biofield, but my human eyes can't see it. So I don't think it exists, right? Now we know that science even says we don't see 96% of even what science knows is there. But I understand where some people are at with that. And that's where I've really enjoyed psychedelics, because they give you the ability to see more of that 96% of what you don't usually see, and also what you don't usually feel. And I can tell you, there were some people there that, are not typically in the same type of circles that we are, nothing like Confluence, things like that. They were like, whoa, that just changed something in me. And I love that, because I feel like psychedelics can be a bridge to allowing people to open their minds to things like this. That, of course, like sound healing is nothing new, right? Like, I mean, this has been going on for eons and eons and eons. And actually, if we look back into antiquity, they probably understood it better than we ever did. I mean, they probably had it throughout their entire cities and things like that, Atlantis, Lemuria, places like that. But I'm curious for you, like, in your own journey, I mean, you've already gone over so many incredible things that have occurred as a result of this modality, but I'm always curious when I speak to people like you that are so high level in one specific modality or a few different modalities. What is, in your experience, the most profound thing you've ever seen happen as a result of tuning fork modalities, either in your life or a client's life? Like, what immediately comes to mind or heart? I'm curious.
Well, it completely changed my life.
Yeah.
Because I started on that self-help path in 1987. And I did a Tony Robbins firewalk, 65-foot firewalk when I was 21. Like I read so many books and workshops and body work. And I got to, 2009, and I was like, okay, I'm still not happy, not rich, not fit. Like, I've availed myself to all the cutting edge information in the human potential movement, and I am still the same. And at the time, my husband was a carpenter, and I started going to school full time for 5 years, starting in 2008. And in 2009, suddenly he didn't have any work, and so we ended up completely broke. We were broke. We were in debt. We were fighting all the time. We had totally different parenting styles. I had chronic mid back pain. I had terrible indigestion. I had 7 plantar warts on my left foot. I had this low level angst. I mean, I was just not a happy, healthy person at all, despite spending thousands and thousands of dollars and hundreds and, all this. Like, what am I missing? Right. And well, it turns out what I was missing was the light. I was missing plasma. I was missing the fourth state of matter. And a whole bunch of things happened. At the end of 2009, my son came to the dinner table one night and he said, "Did you know that there's a fourth state of matter called plasma?" And I was like, "Oh, solid, liquid, gas." Like, somehow I missed the whole state of matter. And that
Yeah.
sent me on this whole journey into discovering plasma, the fourth state of matter, discovering that the body had an electrical system, that my inner light was my spiritual light. And then in 2010, I started training my very first group of students, and started receiving the work. So I had been doing the work for 14 years before I ever had the experience of receiving. I tried to teach my kids when they were like 6 and 9, my sons, and they were like, "Mom, this is so subtle." I was like, "Understand subtleties and women will love you." Just keep on doing this.
Best lesson ever for men. Yeah.
so so what ended up happening to me as a result of being tuned was, the first thing that happened was my 7 plantars warts, my foot went away. My mid back pain went away. My digestion improved. Like, all the places where I had been stuck, it got me unstuck. It got me out of the wiring that I was stuck in and rewired me into my potential, basically. Right. So now I'm 55. I don't have any health issues at all. I have very high, consistent energy. It completely changed. Completely changed my life. And I've seen this happen. So I have 11 biofield tuning instructors and people who've been practicing. Some people who've been doing this as long as 10 years. And they are the most gorgeous, healthy, coherent, functional group of humans. You see they're just radiant. I've seen them get healthier, get out of bad relationships and into better relationships. I've seen them, just reform themselves from the stuck, limited, small part that they were in, and then they were stuck in their pain bodies when they came, and how consistent tuning over time has radically shifted them, right? So all the people around me, like, I live in a very coherent bubble. Even when people come into this office because we teach classes here, they're all like, whoa, the vibe in here is so, it's a conditioned space, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes that can make it a little hard going out into the world, because most people, especially in my neck of the woods, are not coherent. They are not healthy. That you can see that they are just trapped and stuck in all kinds of aspects of their pain bodies. But this work, this understanding the electrical system and working with the electrical system, so it was like I needed another state of matter. Right? That was the problem. They're like, in our culture, they hide the light. They hide the light. They hide the truth. It's like a game. It's like, find the light, find the truth. And I'm very persistent, right? So I was like, I found the light. It's biological.
It's so funny too, because even like I've seen people like Jack Cruz, Dr. Jack Cruz, talking about this. I mean, obviously there's many people that talk about this idea of light, right? And obviously, like, I totally understand what you're talking about. And even he is talking about things that would be very out there for a lot of people to understand, which is, he's saying, like, hey, if you're eating food that is not from your time zone, your body is not able to actually take in the light from that food. And he's really big on sunlight, and again, like, it's so funny to see how backwards everything is. And this is why I love talking to Mark Gober as well, a mutual friend of both of ours, because he's really articulated this perfectly and beautifully in his 5 books, and End Upside Down Thinking and End Upside Down Medicine. There's a bunch of them. But it's just fascinating because, like, it really is like we're living in Idiocracy, and that Idiocracy was the first comedy to ever end up a documentary, you know?
Yeah,
And
my
it's just,
husband says that all the time.
oh, it's so funny, and that's what it's meant to be. Like, yes, you can fall into the darkness of, oh my God, what's happening in the world, et cetera, et cetera. I choose to think of it as hilarious. Like, the presidential hilariousness going on right now is hysterical, right? Like, the state of the world, hysterical. Why? Because that's what I choose for it to be, right? It could be heavy, it could be hard, it could be sorrowful, and all these kind of things. And a lot of people, like you're mentioning, are stuck there. I mean, I think one of the challenges that I imagine you go through, I know I go through, and I imagine everyone listening to this go through, is that we find certain things that allow us to rise into a more whole version of ourselves, and we want to share with everyone. And what do we find? That there's a very small amount of people that are actually wanting to get better. There'll be a lot of people that say, yes, I want to get better. Yes, I want to feel better. But when you actually try to relay information, or you actually try to get them to change something in their life, they don't want to do it, and that's okay. Again, it's not a judgmental thing. It's maybe not everyone's dharma in this lifetime, but it can be challenging. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because I know for me and Rachel, we're very selective on who we hang out with, because I don't want to pick up other people's stuff. Like, luckily, I know modalities like yours that can help me get rid of it if I do take it on. But like, when I went to Confluence, I've been a big music festival guy for years. I love going to all the different festivals, and I go to a lot of big ones as well. And I remember last year we went to Electric Forest for the first time in 4 years. And I've always loved that music festival. It's so fun. It's like just like Kid Central, like scavenger hunts, water park, hot air balloons, and psychedelics. Like, what a more fun area to end up in. But I remember last year when we went, obviously we were different people, like the last 4 years we got to, I would say we got a lot of inquisitive time. We actually traveled more than ever because flight prices were cheap. We didn't buy into the myth, but at the same time, like, we had a lot of time to spend in very clear containers with other people that were really motivated to do all the stuff we're talking about. So we go there, and it was like a melting pot of energy, and it was hard. I mean, we took LSD there one day, and oh my God, I mean, I'm no stranger to strong acid experiences, but that was like, one tab, right? Nothing crazy. And it was like one of the most challenging experiences of my life. And I realized why it was. I was sitting in a hammock, And I just felt like I was melting into myself. And I felt all these sounds from the different stages like smacking together in these trees and just getting all messed up. And I was like, dude, I am like the most out of tune instrument I could ever be right now. And I remember we went back to our tent. And as soon as we got back to our tent and we were like inside and we were in our little kind of area, everything got better. And after that, I was like, okay, that was a lesson there, you know? And then when I went to Confluence, it was like, this is where I parked my car. Like, this is what I want moving forward. I was so bummed I couldn't make it to Music and Sky this year because it sounded like really just like the same type of vibe as Confluence.
Yeah, it was. And we laughed so hard. Like we talk about laughter being the best medicine. I've never had like 5 days in a row where I've split my sides over and over and over again laughing. I was like, God is having so much fun with us through us at the moment because everybody was cracking each other up. It was so wonderful. I can't even tell you how great it was.
It's amazing, you know? And like for me, like, you know, I'll say it again, laughter really is the best medicine. Like my favorite feeling in the world, Eileen, is when you're laughing so hard that the thought goes through your head of like, is it possible to die from laughter? Because if so, I think I'm getting pretty close. And you're like, whatever, this is how I go out. I'm going out with a bang. Like there is no feeling I enjoy more than that. And, you know, my whole life, I've been pulled to find the areas that just laughter is more around. And there was a long time where I thought that was like a negative thing. Like, oh, I need to grow up. I need to do these things. And I'm so grateful that I've been able to learn from people like yourself that have continued to illustrate to me over and over that fun is the point. You know, follow the fun into enlightenment, right? And that term is kind of silly to use, but you get what I mean by it. Like, follow your fun into the best version of who you can be, because the best version of you is the one that allows other people to laugh and is laughing as most as possible,
That's
you know,
great.
as much as possible. Yeah.
It's so true. And all the people that I know who are very self-actualized are funny. You know, people who I hang out with who are really gifted, really talented, they're funny. They're all funny, you know? So I think it's one of the highest forms of human intelligence, if not the highest. And people
Yeah.
who've always got this really, really good comeback, you know, obviously,
Mhm.
in some people, you know, it's a defense and whatever, but
Yeah. Yeah.
it's, no, it's so necessary, right? And you know, if you're not laughing at the world and not taking it so seriously, it's pretty easy to be overwhelmed with all kinds of emotions about what is going on right there.
Mhm.
And I think that is guidance that you know that I've received regularly. Is like, don't take it all so seriously. You know, this is just
Yeah.
a game. This is a sandbox to play in, and you know, and bad things happen and good things happen, and just don't take it all so seriously.
Yeah.
Um, and
No.
I think it's many people. This is something that I've really witnessed um, because they've been so guilted and shamed through the media. Uh, like don't like feel like it's some kind of sacrilege to enjoy themselves, play and laugh. You know, like, oh, I can't be doing that because you know people are being killed somewhere else in the world. I'm like,
Mm.
you're not. You know, I
Yeah.
wouldn't want anyone who has the good fortune of their health and peace where they are to be denying themselves the pleasure of their own life because I'm suffering thousands of miles away. Like, I don't want anyone to deny the experience of their own life because you know what I mean? It's a very
Oh,
strange thing. And so I think people have been, you know, there just is not as much fun going on as there used to be because of the doom and the gloom and the guilt and the shame.
oh,
All the
you hit
more
it.
reason to need it.
Yeah, you hit it nail on the head. I mean, it's such a funny thirst trap, and you know, I love this idea of thirst traps being more than just attractive human beings, but like being everywhere. Another thirst trap is like, no, I can't laugh because there's something going on in the place that I have no ability to change. And the big thirst trap is thinking that by them not laughing, they're actually doing something good.
Yeah.
The best thing and the only thing we can do if we want to help the world is to heal ourselves, right? And not to focus on healing like we already talked about, but to have as much fun as humanly possible. Because when you're having fun, you light up.
Yeah.
And then you become a lighthouse for the world to charge its batteries off of. Now, again, of course, the sermon is important, right? And I'm making sure you're going to some crazy areas when you're all lit up like that, because, you know, like bugs to a flame, they're going to go. But at the same time, like, you know, one of my favorite quotes that I've ever heard recently that made me chuckle is life is far too serious to ever be taken seriously, you know? And it's just like those kind of paradoxical truths are hilarious to me, you know, like they're just really funny. And, you know, again, like, for anyone that's reached a high level of consciousness, for me, like when I crack through on a deep meditation, or I crack through on a 5-gram mushroom dose, or a really deep cannabis ceremony, or even when I'm doing breath work, right? Like, this is one of the funniest things for me. The first time I ever discovered breath work on hallucinogenics, I'd done a lot of breath work, in sober states, but first time I ever tried it in a hallucinogenic state was on LSD. And I honestly, naively didn't think it was going to do anything different. We just happened to be on LSD. I hosted a cannabis ceremony during it. Everyone there was like 25 people at this retreat. We're really connected. And I was like, hey guys, to finish this off, let's all connect hands, do some harmonizing ohms, and blast around a breath work. And so we did. And to our surprise, we shot off like slingshots, like it was like a 5-MeO DMT experience. But when we came back in, all of us at the exact same moment started laughing without looking at each other, without consciously thinking about it. And so we kept doing it for like 25 more rounds, and we were going very deep in it. And every time we'd come back laughing. And so after a while, I started getting with a couple of the people there. I'm like, what do you think the laughter is about? And one of the guys was like, I think it's because we're realizing the cosmic joke of that death is actually, just like Ram Dass said, taking off a tight shoe. It's like the hilarity of the fact that we all get so nervous around this idea of dying, when in reality we are infinite beings. But to experience that, it's pure laughter, it's hysteria, and so that was an experience of mine that shaped me forever after that, where I realized, like, the point of here is not to be serious. The point of here is to play, be passionate, but don't be serious. Seriousness is a disease.
I agree.
So good. Oh, Eileen, this has been amazing. I can't believe an hour has already flown by. I got to have you back on. I have a lot more questions that I want to ask you, but I want to be respectful of our time and everything. But where can people find you? Where can they connect with you? Where can they find out about all your courses, your different practitioners that you have that people can work with? Where can they go to tap into everything that is Eileen Day McKusick?
All right. Well, you can go to biofieldtuning.com, and we have a find a practitioner page. We have a store, biofieldtuningstore.com, where you can get all these beautiful, high quality American made tuning forks and all these recordings that I've made. There's lots of virtual sessions. There's a whole bunch of free sessions that you can check out and listen to. And then I have a YouTube channel. I got quite a lot of videos on YouTube and quite a lot of free tunings. I did this series called Sonic Sundays that are kind of sermons, conversations, and then tuning. So there's a bunch there. It can keep you busy for a while. And then I've got my 2 books, which are both on Kindle and Audible. And then we're on social media. So Instagram, Facebook, just look us up, Biofield Tuning or me. And yeah. And we have rolling courses. We do have probably the most expensive sound healing training out there and the most expensive forks, but we have, we consistently get rated 10 out of 10. From our students, because I have an amazing team. I'm very, very lucky, and everybody is really quality oriented. And so we have a very comprehensive and excellent training program to become a biofield tuning practitioner. And it's such great work to do. Like, I'm so grateful that this path opened up to me, because it's really been such a gift. It's so great to be able to help people, and really help them in kind of short order. And to be able to empower people to really help people like that has been awesome. So.
Wow, that's amazing. Eileen, you are the best. I mean, guys, I can attest to this. I mean, I've tried a lot of different things, and no knocking on emotion code, body code, the other things I've done, they've all helped me. But something about your modality is extremely unique. And whenever I see Paul latch onto something too, I mean, I'd like to consider myself okay, well-read. Paul is like the most well-read, well-studied person I've ever met. I mean, he's a berserker. I think he's an alien. It doesn't even make sense in this reality. And that guy is obsessed with what you do. I mean, a lot of what we did at the Shamanic Sound Healing Workshop was based off of your modalities. And it was just absolutely incredible and life-changing. We were all having so much fun doing it. Yeah. So I highly recommend any of you guys go check out Eileen's stuff. It's amazing. And I always end with the same last question. And I'd love to ask you it. What do you think? You down for it?
Yes.
All right, cool. The question is this. Let's say someone listens to this episode and they get excited to explore psychedelic medicines in their own life. What is the one piece of advice you would offer them to allow them to use the proper discernment in choosing whether or not medicines like the ones we mentioned today are right for them at this point in their life?
Well, I think, you kind of said this about your experience, right? It's really all about where you are. uh, and who you're with. And
Yeah.
so that I think that's really, really important that you're in a beautiful place that doesn't have cross currents going on in it, that you're with people that you feel safe and good with. That the setting has so much to do with it. So, if the setting isn't the best, then don't do it. I would hold out for the perfect place and time, because within those better containers, better experiences happen.
Yeah, 100%. I can attest to that. I've definitely fucked around and found out in a lot of weird settings, and
Yeah.
I can attest to that, guys. So amazing, guys. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I know you did. Eileen is amazing, amazing, amazing at what she does, and she's an amazing human being as well. Being with her at Confluence was just so incredible. Getting her, being able to watch her tune the tune the biofield of the United States to the energetic frequency of July 4th, 1776 was probably the most badass thing I've ever seen in my life. And it doesn't stop there. She's got amazing books, everything you heard us mention today. Go dive into her world, check it all in the show notes. And until next time, wherever you are in the world, I hope you're having the best day ever. And as always, may the source be with you to infinity and beyond. Peace for now, fam.